So in California right now, they're trying to make it a law where, and we've talked about this before on podcasts, but case law basically says that an officer can use reasonable force to effect an arrest, overcome resistance, or prevent an escape. And that's based on Graham versus Connor, which is case law. You can look it up. The reason that helps officers so much is because one of the key phrases in that is says we can use reasonable force to do one of those three things. Reasonable, the way they determine if it was reasonable or not is that they put, when it goes to court and there's a jury, they look at that situation that the officer was in without adding all these different things into it. They look at and they take that officer's experience, his training, where he comes from, all that into a totality, and they say if somebody from the same background, the same training, the same experience, if they were put in that same situation, would they make the same judgment call in that situation? And if they determine it was reasonable, that's how an officer usually gets off. Well, now they're trying to change that standard in California to necessary force, which I think if we do that, if that law passes, that's going to be terrible for law enforcement, and I think it's going to be terrible for the community. And here's why. I have two reasons why. It's going to be terrible for the police officer because now that officer, we already feel a little bit afraid now to make some certain decisions when it comes to using force on somebody because we're afraid either we're going to A, get quarterbacked, B, we're going to get prosecuted, or C, kill somebody. So it's going to make us more hesitant to now use force on somebody that actually needs force used against them because we're thinking about all the secondary things, the secondary problems that are going to arise from that. The second issue with that is, from the community standpoint, is when you have officers that are less apt to be proactive, when you have officers that are less apt to be to use force on somebody, that now puts you as a civilian in more danger from this guy that's causing problems in your city because an officer doesn't want to take a certain level of force against them to stop that threat. And so by changing the use of force from reasonable force to necessary force, I think could be very, very detrimental if it passes. And I know where this is coming from. On face value, it sounds nice. It says actually in the verbiage of behind this law or behind this language, it says that it will make it a lot harder for officers to get off if they use deadly force or any type of use force on somebody. That's what it says. It's going to make it harder for us to get off, which
it's terrifying.
It's terrifying, man, because I have a family, terrifying. I have kids, you know what I mean? So, do I think that officers that are out of the scope of their duties, do I think they should be prosecuted and go to jail? 100%. And I think right now the courts do a really good way of determining whether or not these people are guilty or not. And think about this too. Usually the people deciding whether or not an officer's actions were right or not are civilians because it's a jury. It's a jury trial. So you're making these unrealistic standards for officers without knowing what it actually means to be in an officer's shoes. And I can only say that because I'm an officer now. Now me being in that situation and having to use force on people, having to potentially use deadly force on somebody, man, if you're going to hold me to a standard of was it necessary or not, I mean, how do you judge whether or not it was necessary? And that's that's what's going to come from this.